So let's talk a little bit about why Shirley Turner was a murderer. This will be fun. The hell was wrong with that freaking woman? As always, I am not diagnosing anyone. I am just calling it like I see it from where I sit. I've obviously never met Shirley, never will meet Shirley, but I would like to say that Shirley had a horrible, rare set of risk factors that placed her on this tragic trajectory of murder, but I cannot. Because Shirley Turner was someone with a cluster B personality disorder, and they're everywhere. And Shirley's particular flavor was borderline personality disorder. That name is the worst because it always confuses people. It originally meant the psychologists thought that these people border on between psychosis and neurosis, but that they should rename this disorder. It's a tough one for people to understand, but you really, really, really need to understand it. In fact, they should teach it to you in high school, because I promise you, you either have been or will be or are being manipulated by one right now. Borderlines are everywhere. And they're not horrible, but they can be, and it's why it's important to recognize them. The technical descriptions of it never seem to drum up the vision that allows people to see who they are. Case in point, I was in my 30s and had 9,000 degrees in psychology before I recognized my mom was a borderline, and I didn't even recognize it. 2 psychologists told me that my mom, psychologist and Dr. Drew, like, hey, you know your mom's borderline, right? Wow. Recently, however, I saw Dr. Shannon Curry's description of it on the Depp.
Yeah, Johnny Depp.
Yeah, the Johnny Depp.
Really sad that I know exactly. I didn't even skip it.
The
Depp
I know exactly versus the Heard trial. And the first thing I did was jump on my teeny tiny social media account to tell people to watch Dr. Curry. And I got so many messages of like, oh my gosh, my sister's a borderline. Oh my gosh, I realized my ex-girlfriend is a borderline. Here's what the technical description looks like, and then I'm going to tell you about what it kind of looks like in people you know. It's a frantic effort to avoid real or imagined abandonment by friends and family. So they're constantly sabotaging because they think you're going to leave me. Unstable personal relationships, and so all their relationships are tumultuous. Friends, coworkers, lovers, and they alternate between idealization and devaluation. So the second someone comes in their life, you're going to hear them be like, oh my God, I just met the most amazing person. I love her. She's the best person, the smartest person. And then eventually they'll be like, oh, I hated that girl. She ended up being a total, whatever, criminal. Everything is black and white. And that particular effort that they make they don't make the effort, the particular behavior of idealizing somebody and then, devaluating, they go from hero to villain, is called splitting. They literally can, and the same people can go back up on the pedestal and then be torn right back off again. And if you know a borderline, you're like, wait a minute, that's true. Every boss they got was amazing at first and then horrible. Every boyfriend, every best friend, every roommate. I see Amy's face. Things are landing. They have a very distorted and unstable self-image, and that affects their moods and their values. And they tend to be impulsive, have impulsive behaviors that can have dangerous outcomes. So that can be excessive spending. It's usually a lot of unsafe sex, reckless driving, drug use, etc. They tend to self-harm or claim self-harm. So they might cut, but they're usually saying, I should just die. I want to just die. I'm going to kill myself, to manipulate whoever it is who they want to stay. Okay. So they'll be like, I'm leaving you. Don't leave. I hate you. And then she hates him. And then she's fighting with her roommates. And then everyone at work hates her, and then she's just going to end it because she can't handle it. And you go into their lives and you're like, wait a minute, this person has been through so much trauma, and here's why. They've always been abused, whether it's true or not. They have limitless stories of the trauma they've endured in their life. Often it is true. There's kernels of truth in it, but they're masters at exaggeration as well. And sometimes they'll create a new trauma if they're about to lose somebody. I just discovered I was raped as a child. I'm not saying these people haven't been abused, and there's some evidence that early abuse does trigger borderline to happen.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Is that is it something that you're born with, or it's something that...
It's highly genetic.
Okay.
It's highly genetic, okay. But there is a belief that there is often a childhood trauma that triggers it.
Okay.
But it is genetic. It runs in families. You can't miss it. So the problem with it is you don't know it until you've heard these descriptions, and then you're like, oh boy, that makes sense. The root of all of it is a fear of abandonment. but they're so manipulative and controlling, and you feel like you can't leave because of everything they've gone through. You feel like you can't put up a boundary because of all the trauma this person has been through.
You need to help them.
You need to help them. But then, so you're their hero for a hot minute, but then you become their villain. And you're like, what did I do? All I've ever done is try to help you. And you're left with the fog, the fear, obligation, and guilt. You can't leave this person. Amy's almost in tears. I think she's recognized a borderline in her life.
Is it more prevalent in women than in men?
Yes. It looks a little different in men. It's
Okay.
far more prevalent in women. That might be because women seek help more than men do.
That's interesting.
But I'm going to tell you what it looks like in men too. In
Okay.
women, what it looks like is they're the victim in every story. So they constantly have a story of being abused or traumatized, and they're the victim. Every breakup, they were the victim. Every time they've been fired, every fight with their mother, they are the victim, they are the victim, or they're the hero of the story. That's something to think about when these people are in your orbit. Do they ever take blame? No. A borderline is allergic to blame. They're allergic to culpability. It is never their fault. They're always in a fight. There's always some sort of drama everywhere you look. But then they can make up with that person, and that person becomes a hero again. And every situation is black and white.
I was going to say it doesn't seem like there's gray.
There's no gray.
Yeah.
So they had the best time of their lives or they had the worst time of their lives. Everything's, and you're never going to hear like, look, I did this and this and this, which triggered this person to do this and this and this. No, it's that person's evil. And I have been victimized once again. If they're not getting what they want, that's when they threaten self-harm, or they're going to hurt themselves. They don't typically kill themselves. When they do it, they threaten it all the time, but when they do, it's usually they've made an attempt to get some attention.
Kind of by mistake or something.
It's an accidental suicide.
Okay.
Yeah. They've had lots of boyfriends, partners, husbands, and all of those are villains. So I had this show called Stalked Someone's Watching on Investigation Discovery. And when I was examining the stalkers, a large majority of those who stalked their previous lovers were borderlines. They can become stalkers. And Shirley exhibits all of the symptoms. Horrifying. Yeah, I know. And also, maybe we recognize a few symptoms in ourselves. I'm like, dancing dangerously close to, leaving a lot of message like swingers. And here's the thing, it's super important that if you do recognize it in yourself, you can treat borderline personality disorder. But if you're allergic to criticism, then borderlines famously do not like to be treated. Because if you go to therapy, the therapy's going to be like, you have some work to do. You have borderline personality disorder. I do not. They start accusing the therapist of stuff. Some therapists will not deal with a borderline because they always get accused of molesting them or making advances because borderlines do that.
Oh, it's just opening yourself up for a lawsuit.
I have met many therapists who are incredible with borderlines, but the lawsuits come up. And if a borderline does recognize and want healthy relationships and identifies this in themselves, they can be helped. But you just...
Is it possible though? I mean, how, like...
It can improve.
It can.
It
Okay.
can improve.
I was just like, what statistically, do you know like how many borderline people are actually able to seek help and be successful at it?
I have never known a borderline in my life stay in therapy, and my therapist friends will talk about having one or two who've been there for a year or 2 years. It's not something they do well. I'll tell you a little bit about the treatments that are available and why this story is on this podcast.
Okay.
Because there is something that we could do, and if we could prevent the Bagbys of the world ever having to deal with, one time would be enough for me to jump. But they went through it twice. So I'll do 200 episodes and bore the shit out of everybody if I have to. If we stop one person, one borderline from committing murder.